Good morning. Assalamu alaikum to our honorable panelists, my dear colleagues, and our esteemed audience. Today, we bring you a unique and impactful edition of our Justice Talks webinar series titled Generated in Camps, China's Forced Labor in Global Supply Chain. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the traditional lens of Treaty 6, and we deeply respect and honor the Cree, Dene, and Métis people whose territory we are on. I'm Tazeen Hasan, the Advocacy Manager for Justice for All Canada. Welcome to Justice Talks, webinar series dedicated to human rights and Canadian foreign policy. It is my privilege to welcome all of you on behalf of Justice for All Canada, a human rights advocacy organization committed to ending the genocide of Indigenous communities and the persecution of minorities worldwide. I would like to acknowledge the challenging circumstances in the Middle East, particularly in Gaza. Our heart goes for the civilians who are facing the horrors of the war, particularly children. Justice for All is committed to fostering dialogue for an immediate ceasefire. Let's not forget that our Uyghur brothers and sisters who have been facing a genocide for over 5 years. Today, the focus of our webinar is the connection between the forced labor in Xinjiang or East Turkestan or Chinese Turkestan, as we have different names, and the genocide of over 11 million Uyghurs, and other Central Asian nations. We will also discuss the direction of the Canadian foreign policy and the future strategies to put the right legislations in the Canadian Parliament. Justice for All has several campaigns, including Kashmir Action, Save India from Fascism, Save Uyghurs, and Burma Task Force. Justice for All originated in North America to collaborate with the US government and the United Nations, along with the other global advocacy organizations against the Bosnian genocide in 1990s. One of the achievements of our Bosnian advocacy is the declaration of rape as a war crime by international institutions. In Canada, we officially began working in 2012, advocating against the Rohingya genocide long before the world recognized it as such. Thanks to the efforts of Justice for All and other organizations, Canada became the first country to recognize it. Similarly, we started working on Uyghur genocide in 2018, and Alhamdulillah, Canadian Parliament recognized Uyghur genocide in 2020, thanks to the combined efforts of advocacy organizations in Canada. We are lucky to have a strong panel today, which includes representatives from academic community, victim community, advocacy organizations, and of course from the Parliament Hill. Let me introduce our panelists. Kayum Masimov is the General Secretary, is the project manager of the Uyghur-based advocacy group, the Uyghur Rights Project, Ottawa-based advocacy group, the Uyghur Rights Project. Born into a family of Uyghur refugees in the former Soviet Union, Kayum Masimov has been actively involved in East Turkestan independence movement since his early years. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations from the Oriental Institute in Tashkent, Turkey, and a master's degree in economics from Vanderbilt University. He actively participates in Canadian Uyghur community affairs and has provided assistance in numerous immigration and refugee cases within the provincial and federal courts. Kayum served as the head of Uyghur Canadian Association from 2012 to 2015 and contributed to various parliamentary hearings dedicated to the Uyghur cause. Darren Byler, our next panelist is Darren Byler. Darren Byler is an anthropologist who has been engaged with Uyghur research since at least 2018. His research examines the dispossession of stateless populations through forms of contemporary capitalism and colonialism in China, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. His monograph, Terror Capitalism, Uyghur Dispossession and Masculinity in a Chinese City, published by Duke University Press in 2021, examines emerging forms of media, infrastructure, economics, and politics in Uyghur homeland in Chinese Central Asia, i.e. East Turkestan. His further research resulted in a narrative-driven book titled In the Camps, Chinese High-Tech Penal Colony, By the way, Darren is an old supporter who greatly assisted me during my capstone project at Harvard in 2019. Razia Mahmood. Our third panelist is Razia Mahmood. Razia is both a victim and a witness of the forced labor in Xinjiang or East Turkestan. Born in Gulja, East Turkestan, she left China on a student visa and moved to Canada with her family in 2007, where she currently resides. She's actively involved in various organizations and initiatives that focus on raising awareness about the Uyghur situation and supporting Uyghurs both within Canada and globally. She serves as the communication director of Uyghur Academy of Canada, an organization dedicated to promoting Uyghur culture, language, and rights in Canada. She's a board member of East Turkestan Association of Canada, an organization that represents the interest of the Uyghur community in Canada. She's also a member of the World Uyghur Congress, an international organization that advocates for the rights and freedom of Uyghurs. Additionally, she's a member of International Support for Uyghurs, a group that works to support Uyghurs and raise awareness about their plight. Razia is based in Ottawa. We have another panelist, Mehliya. Has Mehliya joined us? Mehliya Cetinkaya is one of the youngest Uyghur activists in Canada. She is the program and outreach manager for Alberta Uyghur Relations, has been a passionate advocate for the Uyghur community through diverse media channels, including protests, conferences, and photo galleries. During her high school years, she dedicated her efforts to raising awareness about the Uyghur genocide. Her current aspiration is to broaden the focus to promote an understanding of Uyghur identity and how Canadians can extend a warm welcome, nurture, and support for the Uyghur community. And our last panelist is Sister Saliha Farouk. So Saliha Farouk is the advocacy manager for Justice for All Canada. Saliha Farouk is the government relation manager for Justice for All Canada. And she's consistently lobbying with Canadian government to support the Uyghur cause, the legislations regarding the Uyghur refugees, and the forced labor. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Yeah, Sister Tazeen, our MP, Honorable Garnett, is here with us. Maybe you don't see him on the screen.
Okay, let me introduce MP Garnett. So we have with us a representative from the Parliament Hill, Honorable MP Garnett. Genuis is the Member of Parliament for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. He's currently the Shadow Minister for International Development and is the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee of International Human Rights and a member of Government Operations Committee. He also served as the Vice Chair of the Foreign Affairs and Public Accounts Committee. Genuis has been active on many high-profile domestic and international human rights issues. His interest in human rights was shaped by the experience of his grandmother, a Holocaust survivor. Genuis is a passionate advocate for free speech, for increased efforts to combat violence against women. He's a supporter of Bill C-257, a bill to add political belief and activity to the Canadian Human Rights Act as prohibited grounds of discrimination. Bill C-350, a bill combating torture and terrorism. And Motion 57, a motion to promote bystander awareness and intervention training to combat violence. Thanks everyone to join us here. And I would like to start from Brother Qasim Masimov.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us, Brother Kayum.
Yeah, thank you for
Masimov.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you all participants sharing your Sunday morning with us. It demonstrates your commitment to the cause. Let me share my screen with you. And I have entitled this presentation as Uyghur forced slave labor in Canada's import supply chain. Why it is, what it is, and how do we address it? Okay, let me see. How do you do this next? So I broke down into several segments, what is happening. By the way, Mr. Tazeen was right in mentioning that Xinjiang in Chinese means new domain. So by large, this definition is rejected by Uyghurs, since we see this as a colonialist, and we refer to our historic landmass as East Turkestan. I'd like to touch base on what is the legal definition of forced labor, and why is it Uyghur slave labor is a category by itself, because of its scale and scope, because of systematic slavery, which is state-sponsored. I'd like to talk about Canada's action and inaction, its international obligations, and maybe we will leave more room for possible questions and comments which might come after from the audience. So what do we know so far? These are the facts. The UN estimates, that 1 million Uyghurs are imprisoned and detained. UNHCR last year cited that crimes against humanity might be happening in Uyghur region. The exiled diaspora says that the 5 to 7 million people are detained or went through so-called educational centers. So we talk about the largest concentration of any ethnic group since the time of Holocaust, and this genocide is happening. It's been in its 8th year. It's happening right before our eyes. Canada was the first, Canadian Parliament was the first legislative body in the world which recognized Uyghur genocide, and I'm very proud of that achievement. That as a Canadian, I'm very proud of that fact. 10 states followed this suit. However, it is the first step. We think that much more have to be done. The same, committee, I believe Garnett was part of it, was stating in its March 2021 statement that, what kind of, treatment Uyghurs are subjected to, like torture, inhumane and degrading treatment, punishment, forced labor, arbitrary separation of children, and brainwashing. So these are the things which probably nobody is disputes right now. It's been a common acknowledged public secret. What is forced labor by itself? If we go back to 1930 to International Labor Organization definition of forced labor, we can read that all work or service which is exacted from any person under duress, menace of any penalty, and for which the said person has not been paid, and he's not been participating voluntarily. There are many different forms of forced labor, which might be like debt bondage, trafficking for labor or sexual exploitation, slave-like, conditions which individuals are subjected to force, overtime, non-paid, and or payment with a very low minimum wage or no wage at all, such as free labor. And that involves also a very young, vulnerable segment of the population, children. Why is it Uyghur slave labor is so important, and it's a category by itself? We have to look at the scope of the region and what does this region produces and exports. So I'd like to briefly state on issues, on items, major items, which probably we as Canadians consume on a daily basis. The cotton, and when you see made in China, the textile coming from China, and you can just think that 90% of Chinese domestic product come from East Turkestan, which itself is about 30% of global supply. Tomato and tomato products. Whenever you go to McDonald's, Subway, you use ketchup, when you consume Heinz soups, etc. So 70% of tomato paste supply globally. There is very trendy, very trendy topic, clean and green. Everyone is concerned about environment, and there is a drive now installing solar panels, and under the guise of, it's clean and it's green. Almost half of that solar panels, the world globally, comes from Uyghur region because of that very specific ingredient, which is called polysilicon. So it's 50%, like almost half of the world production and world supply comes from Uyghur region. And it's very pollutant, very environmentally degrading, processing, extracting this polysilicon. And people who are subjected to extract this polysilicon are work in slave labor conditions. We might mention red dates. 20% of global supply comes from Uyghur region. Gloves, human hair, and recently there've been revelations made by New Yorker, the journal New Yorker. They say, a very heavy involvement of Uyghur slave labor in seafood industry. Someone might wonder, Uyghurs and seafood, these things which are two different categories, are two different things, because Uyghur region is the most geographically isolated region from any sea. Yet, because of that mass systematic forced migration of relocation of Uyghurs from interior into eastern China, into interior China, and placement under these semi-military work camps, plants, Uyghurs are subjected to, cleaning, packing seafood, which we as Canadians end up consuming. There is also electric batteries. For example, Tesla opened its manufacturing plant in Urumqi, a few kilometers away from the concentration camps. And Volkswagen and all these major brands, you can just name it, which can come to your mind. So what would be the probable response of Canada, for instance, when we talk about, Canadian response to it? Certainly there have been many expressed concerns that, Canada is gravely concerned about mass transfer of forced labor of Xinjiang to provinces across China. There was a Global Affairs advisory issued in January 2021, for instance. There is awareness in Ottawa that this is the slave labor products, tainted merchandise entering Canada, and I believe there is some, understanding that it needs some unison coordination with partners to tackle this issue. There are, for example, statements saying that repressive surveillance, mass arbitrary detention, mass transfers of forced labor, et cetera, et cetera. So there are numerous statements on the part of the government. There've been integrity declaration on doing business with Xinjiang. There was anti-forced labor clause in all federal contracts. There is a so famous core, Canadian ombudsperson for responsible enterprise, which kind of is a unique Canadian experience. It's been established in 2018, I believe. And the budget was, so far they have spent $30 million employing 10 people. And, but if we talk about outcome, after years of, being in service and employing so many people, there was no report came out from CORE. And actually, our organization I represent, Europe Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, we have filed 14 files, 14 complaints, and this organization CORE, out of 15 total complaints, the 14 complaints comes from Uyghur organization and a coalition of 28 NGOs. So it shows that, although in the letter such organization exists, there is some theoretical remedies which we can, as a civil society, can go and ask a remedy. But in practice, it's very far from, being active and being feasible. There is somehow, however, an acknowledgement by the part of the government, and it's been announced this spring, at least its commitment to eliminate by 2024 all forced labor, and they specifically mentioned Uyghur forced labor. So it's have never seen before acknowledgement. We are very grateful for that, but it remains to be seen if the government will follow up on its own commitments. So Certainly, there is a Bill 2S211, which been now which been adopted by the Parliament. So basically, this is an act to enact the fighting against forced labor and child labor in supply chains. It's been adopted already, and what it does is that it calls for the companies to provide or to manifest their due diligence, that the companies, Canadian companies operating overseas, they have to take steps to prevent and reduce the risk of forced labor. They have to do this, they have to train employees, and they have to make self-assessment. And they have to report on annual basis to the, the superiors. And they have to report this openly, publicly. But, if anything, it remains as a wishful thinking. And I believe the data shows that, if when we impose these voluntarily measures on companies will not take it seriously and they do not follow up. So even if the company can theoretically find guilty in profiting from slave labor, the potential penalty for such company under this current bill is a penalty of $250,000. So imagine Walmart, they do importation of like billions and billion dollars worth merchandise on a daily basis. 400, 500 containers entering Canada on a daily basis. What is $250,000 penalty potentially might do for them? And the proposed bill, the bill which was already adopted, is not compatible with U.S. counterpart law, UFLPA, Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. The beauty of American bill is that the Americans put onus on the importers. The importers should prove that their merchandise is not tainted by Uyghur forced slave labor. So there is zero expense for the taxpayers, for the customs. It is up to importers to prove that their cargo, that their merchandise is free. Otherwise, they cannot import these products from Uyghur region. So there is a region-wide complete ban on all imports from Uyghur region, which we as a civil society would like to see happening in Canada. For example, this is the data from US Customs. And not only Canada is in breach of many international obligations, we can see that Canada at the current is in breach of CUSMA agreements, Canada, US, Mexico free trade agreements. So we are cheating with our own closest ally, military, political, and economic ally, US, by re-exporting Uyghur forced labor tainted imports into US. And you can see that data shown here, Canada is among those violators. There are certainly countries like Mexico, Vietnam, and other states which do re-exportation of slave labor. So potentially, because of that obscurity of CBSA, Canadian Border Services Agency, we could not see if any merchandise denied entry to US been ending up in Canada. But we suspect this is the case, and we talk about the trade worth billions. So I'd like to quote here that Canada become a dumping ground for merchandise which been prohibited entering US, Uyghur forced labor tainted products. There was some legislation attempts to replicate UFLPA in Canada, notably by Senator Husako's Bill S204, which also called on imposing US-style ban on importation of all goods manufactured or produced wholly or in part in Xinjiang, but it's been stalled since May 2022. So basically, that legislation was debated at the same time as S211, S204 and S211. But S211 was the preferred, legislation by the government. It was expedited. It received red carpet treatment, but it does not do any good. It is even harmful. I can say that in my opinion, it is just a smokescreen, and which negates or elevates any pressure on the government to be proactive. They say they put up that declaratory wishful thinking. There should be no slave labor, no child labor. Nobody argues with that. But if you go to any shopping center here in Canada, Montreal, Ottawa, Vancouver, you see that our market shelves are full with merchandise produced by slave labor. Unfortunately, that is the case, and it's still there. So I would say that forced slave labor tainted products and the imports we end up consuming in Canada are integral part of the Uyghur genocide, which is perpetrated by Chinese Communist regime, because it's state imposed, it's planned, it's long term, and it's not driven by individual corporate greed by itself, by the state itself, by China. So hence, it requires very adequate, coordinated, unison measures from allies, like-minded states. So at the present, Canada's ban, it's in the breach of CUSMA agreements, and it might, lead to some, friction between close allies. So, next time you go and you see made in China, I would argue that, ask yourself, is it worth buying it? Is it ethical? And be reflective of that. And you can reach out to me at kayum@europe.ca. And I'd like to stop here and maybe take questions, or, so we can have more time on that. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Brother Kayum, for the insightful presentation. We just have... Thank you for the insightful presentation, statistics examining the difference between the US Uyghur bill and its Canadian counterpart, and for shedding light on the shortcomings within the current Canadian legislation. The thorough analysis and clarity you provided on these critical issues are immensely valuable. Your expertise and dedication in highlighting these weaknesses are appreciated as we strive for stronger and more effective legislative measures. Thank you for your important contribution to our understanding. And I'm quickly going to the next speaker, Honorable MP Garnett, for his opening remarks. Thank you, MP Garnett.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity today and for hosting this webinar. It's great to be on with some friends and people that have been working on these issues and informing me for a long time. I think want to just pick up where Kayum has left off and talk a little bit about the work that's happening in Parliament, some of the legislative items. Of course, important point he made that Canada's Parliament was the first to recognize the Uyghur genocide, and it was our conservative opposition that put forward that motion. But the motion had support across all parties. However, the cabinet abstained, and to this day, we still do not have any comment from the cabinet, from officially the government of Canada, about whether or not they recognize the Uyghur genocide. We actually had a second motion that was a concurrence of a committee report that recognized the Uyghur genocide, and a maybe on some level funny but also sad event unfold where the trade minister, Mary Ng, voted in favor of recognizing the Uyghur genocide, but then stood up on a point of order to tell the House of Commons that she had pushed the wrong button on her app. So she did the right thing by accident and tried to reverse her vote. So she wanted to make clear that she does not, in fact, share the view of the majority of the House recognizing the Uyghur genocide. And of course, I mentioned the trade minister because she has a very important role to play in this discussion about supply chains. There are many aspects in which Parliament is engaging and seeking to respond to the Uyghur genocide: immigration measures, discussions around sanctions. but of course I'll focus my comments on the supply chain discussion. Parliament passed Bill S211, and I supported that legislation because I believed it was an improvement on the absence of any legislation. But I certainly agree that it is not adequate to addressing the challenges that are in front of us, especially as it relates to the situation of Uyghurs. I think there are two things we need to talk about in terms of specifically addressing the situation of Uyghur forced labor. A coordinated approach and a regionalized approach. So a coordinated approach means working more effectively with our American and with our other allies. I see no reason why we couldn't have a coordinated, a fully coordinated regime where we would know for certain that a ship that was turned back from docking at Seattle would not be able to dock in Vancouver. We have the same sort of stated policy objective, which is not allowing forced and child labor, slave labor made products to be imported. And the Americans, of course, have significant capacity for verification and investigation. And there are some cases where it's great to have a made in Canada solution, but when we have clearly the same defined policy objectives, we shouldn't be needing to reinvent the wheel. We should coordinate with our allies so that we can, in fact, benefit from all of the investigative capacity and the information that's gathered by our American partners. And I think I can make the case to the Canadian people that this is a less onerous, less expensive, less complicated regime if we just say, let's have agreement, let's have alignment with like-minded partners when it comes to blocking products made from Uyghur slavery. And Canada, despite stating our good intentions, Canada hasn't blocked a single shipment on the basis of it containing products involving Uyghur slave-made products, and yet there've been a very substantial number of interdictions by American authorities. So that alignment is simple, straightforward, and would have positive effects. And why not seek to broaden it? Why not seek to bring in a broader range of like-minded partners up to what has really been the American standard, a standard set in the United States on a bipartisan basis. So that's a coordinated approach, and then secondly, a regional approach. What I mean by a regional approach is we should have legislation that deals with forced labor, child labor globally, because there are many contexts in which you can have, for instance, bonded labor, forced labor happening in a weak state outside of the eyes of the government, and it can happen in isolated pockets in many places around the world. So we do need a global regime dealing with forced labor. But we also need to recognize that there are particular situations, and I think the situation in East Turkestan is obviously one, where we're not just talking about bonded labor happening in isolated corners outside of the eye of the state, but we're talking about a systemic state coordinated process of the use of slave labor. And while we should have a global regime that deals with realities that can happen anywhere, we should have a particular unique regime that deals with regions or places where forced labor is so prevalent and there's state complicity such that there's efforts made to cover that up, a broader restrictions are appropriate in that case. And so that's what the United States has with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, that presumes that any product from East Turkestan contains slave labor unless it can be proven otherwise. And Bill S204 from my colleague, Conservative Senator Leo Hosakos, that would seek to bring in something similar here in Canada. Of course, another framework you could have would be a bill in general that would allow the designation of specific regions where for this kind of treatment that would apply to East Turkestan, but that could also apply to other designated regions. Then that type of an approach would be more evergreen. You could use it in future situations that sadly might emerge. So this is what I'm advocating for, is to move our laws forward with the reverse onus type regime, a regional approach, as discussed in S204, and a coordinated approach that would see us align with the United States. And I'll just conclude by saying that investigations around supply chains are complicated. There are certain kinds of regimes, such as a due diligence regime, that can be very administratively onerous for business and for government. The solutions that I'm advocating actually would amount to a substantive simplification. Aligning with the United States would make enforcement substantially easier. Using the information that the Americans are already gathering would make enforcement substantially easier. And having the presumption of forced labor for goods coming out of East Turkestan, unless proven otherwise, again, makes enforcement quite simple and straightforward. Basically, don't source from there unless you can really be button-up certain. So I think these are pragmatic, effective approaches that would allow Canada, in partnership with other countries, to combat the scourge of Uyghur slavery.
Thank you very much, MP Garnett, for your insightful opening remarks, mentioning the differences between Canadian and American legislation, and mentioning the forced labor in other areas of the world. Now I will invite academic and expert Darren Byler for his opening remarks.
Well, sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. It's such an important conversation. I'm going to sort of summarize some of what people have said already, and hopefully say some new things as well. Just to really put a human face on what this looks like back in the Uyghur homeland. These are millions of people that are affected by what we're talking about today. People that are just regular Muslims trying to live a life, create a better future for their children. Their crimes or their activities, because the Chinese state in their statements to the UN has said that these aren't actually crimes, they're activities that don't rise to the level of criminality, so they're sort of pre-crimes, are just normal things like fasting during Ramadan, going to the mosque more than 200 times, learning, studying to recite the Quran, become a Qari or Hafiz, which is just a very normal thing that any Muslim person would want to do. And that all Uyghurs I was meeting, especially young men, they were studying these kinds of things in their villages. Things that were permitted in the past, or weren't fully illegal in the sense that the state wasn't putting people in prison for doing these things. Years later, maybe in a decade or more later, they would then put them in these camps. So these are families that are torn apart by the system of forced labor. Since 2017, 614,000 people, according to the state prosecutor's office in Xinjiang, the Uyghur region, have been formally prosecuted. China has a 99% success rate in prosecutions. So virtually all of those people are now in prison. And they're also in forced labor situations in prison. So 614,000 people in prison. On top of that, we have maybe 1 million more people that were in the camps that have now been transferred into factory situations, which are basically securitized facilities. They're not permitted to leave. They're not permitted to visit their families. They're held there indefinitely in these work conditions. And then on top of that, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions more, that have been sent to work in similar kinds of factories, not ever having been in the camp, but being threatened with being sent to the camp if they don't agree to their assigned labor. So that is now the system that is endemic, is widespread throughout all of Uyghur society. All Uyghur adults are affected by the system. And we're talking about 12 million Uyghurs, 15 million Muslims altogether in the region, which is half the population of Canada almost. So it's a very large population of people. And as others have said already, this affects global supply chains in really substantial ways. You really can't buy a fast fashion product like something from H&M or any other retailer that isn't tainted by these products. If it says made in China, it's going to be connected in some way to the Xinjiang system. And so you really, if you're wanting to buy cheap clothes, you need to look elsewhere outside of the made in China label. It moves into all kinds of different domains of the economy. It's been mentioned: electronics, car batteries, base metals, all kinds of things are coming from this region. It's a huge region. It's the size of Ontario and Manitoba combined. It's a resource colony for the entire Chinese economy. So this is a really important part of what China is sending out into the world. And as trade partners with China, Canada needs to be very aware of what we're agreeing to by continuing to accept these products. I agree with what the other speakers have said about that we need to, I think, implement a reverse onus sort of commitment in law, saying that we won't accept products made in the East Turkestan, in the Xinjiang region, in Canada, and probably we have to extend that further. Potentially, I mean, we need to be looking very seriously at supply chain to see how they are kind of laundering Xinjiang or East Turkestan products elsewhere. So I know from researchers that have gone recently to the region, that are going to textile factories in Eastern China, and they're telling me that they have orders now to not disclose where they're sourcing their cotton from. So they're actively trying to hide the supply chain. They're also sending things to second countries like Vietnam, so that when you're buying things, it'll say made in Vietnam, but actually the source is still China. So we need to be comprehensive in looking at these supply chains, and I think working with the U.S. and other allies would help in that process, because this is it's an immense task. But I think the U.S. is quite farther ahead than we are in terms of starting that task, and so I think working together with them would help us to align ourselves with them. So yeah, that's basically what I have to share. I mean, the other thing I could talk about, and we could do this in Q&A, is talk about the technology that is coming from this region that was sort of tested as a sort of laboratory space. These things are now here in Canada as well. The same sorts of face recognition systems, camera systems built by companies like Hikvision and Dahua. I see them every day as I go around Vancouver. Those systems are here in place, and those are now banned in the United States. We should be considering banning some of this technology as well, both for sort of national security reasons, but more, I think, even more in terms of a moral position, because we don't want to be complicit in surveillance companies that have tested and built their products on Uyghur bodies. They built these systems there and are now exporting them elsewhere. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Darren. Your experience and your observations living and researching in East Turkestan and China is eye-opening, and you add a human voice to the issue. And now I will invite Sister Razia Mahmood. Sister Razia is both a victim and an observer of forced labor. She visited East Turkestan in 2019, and she has some observations to share. Sister Razia, over to you. Sister Razia, can you hear me? We can't hear you. You are
okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello everyone, thank you for having me. Sorry, I was accepted this invitation in a last minute because some issues, and probably I'm surprised to this panel. My friend Kayum and the Honorable Garnett, Genuis, and Darren, our dearest friends, are already follow up on provided these facts about Uyghur forced labor, and myself, I'm the witness. And actually, the Chinese government, regardless of these facts, the Chinese government has consistently denied the allegation regarding Uyghur forced labor, dismissing such claims as fabrications and part of broader campaign against China. However, in 2000, I personally witnessed my students being forced to work in cotton fields during their summer holidays. I was a medical college teacher at that time. I'm still working in Canada in medical related field. The school assigned me to accompany my students for cotton picking near the Alberta city, where the Chinese Bingtuan of Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps XPCC 5th Division operates. This name, this XPCC, is pretty familiar, I think, to the panelists. We were deployed there for an entire month, and the students had to work in the cotton field under very hot weather, excessively long hours, as early as 5 a.m. to continue to 9 p.m. With minimal breaks and rest periods. So I have to go with my students early morning to the cotton field and back at 9. So it has been 23 years, but every time I think that it's just so hard. So some of my students developed allergic reaction to cotton, resulting in itchy and swollen hands. But those health concerns were overlooked, and so demanding labor had a severe impact on the physical and mental well-being of my students. I witnessed all this. Each day, my students had to work under those harsh conditions. They have to meet this cotton picking quotas set by authorities. So if they are not meeting these norms set by authorities, results in various forms of punishment, such as verbal abuse, fines, and some severe times they have to they're gonna expulsion from school. So we are in 2023 right now. I was bringing my students to cotton picking in 2000. So since being this, and I know they continuously next 2001, 2002, they went to cotton picking, but at that time I already left from my country, is Turkestan. So 23 years right now. Even before I know other students are going to went to cotton picking, even I was 6 years old at school, primary school. We were working in some stuff to go help with some labor at school. It's very similar situation like at the North Korea. So our school's work was done by students and the teachers. So since then, I was myself was 6 years old, but later on, I witnessed modern slave labor. Unfortunately, those problems have not solved yet. So hopefully this panel, our discussion, experts opinion, and this builds hope, this stops this forced labor. Thank you. Sorry for being emotional.
Thank you, Sister Razia. We can understand it takes incredible strength to revisit such traumatic memories. Your testimony is a vital step towards raising awareness and seeking justice for those who have suffered. Now I will invite Sister Mehliya from Alberta for her opening remarks.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, as Tazeen has introduced me, my name is Mehliya. I'm with the Alberta Uyghur Association, a small organization that we've created in the Alberta region to shed light on the Uyghurs' plight and the genocide happening. As we all know, the situation in East Turkestan, the occupied territory by the CCP, is very severe. And we're seeing that the forced labor has gotten to a point that the tag that says made in China that says it's not made in China no longer equates to that, as the forced labor is found in so many various aspects of different companies and their supply chains. We're looking at the relocation of like 500,000 Uyghur people from regions to participate in the government's forced labor training and forced labor programs. And so with this, that we're in 2018 alone, there was at least like 500,000, I believe, people who were transferred into government training for forced labor. It's a 2 to 3 month intensive cotton picking purposefully to boost the rural economy for the Han Chinese. And this relocation using Uyghurs has created an opportunity for the Han Chinese to take a step back and step into authoritarian positions of these cotton picking factories and these sites where Uyghurs are expected to pick under extensive government watch and monitoring. And they're not, as we know, the situation in the camps, and those who have been released from the camps are often taken to these forced labor sites. And we're seeing in regions of Hotan and Aksu, and there was 150,000 to 60,000 each regions that was released in uncovered government documents by Adrian Zenz. And the production of this, especially cotton, there's so many shell companies that the CCP has been working through to be undetected or trying to be undetected. For example, we've seen that Shein was opened up, a Shein distribution location was opened up in the GTA, the Greater Toronto area, and Shein and Temu, they're like companies, they have the de minimis method where they put smaller packages, avoiding customs and border screening. This is reported through the US, and as MP Garnett has mentioned, working with our allies is a great way to utilize that research, as the legislation is similar, but to also ensure that Canada is doing its job with this S211 in preventing the forced labor into entering the Canadian borders and to being accessible to Canadians. Because we're seeing that the youth, especially from a personal experience, that we are struggling with mental health issues, and what's seen in our older generations who've immigrated here, but even the Uyghur youth who are following these links and these trends of social media and companies like Shein and H&M that are very, very complicit in Uyghur forced labor. There is a lack of understanding of what this forced labor actually looks like. There's a lack of understanding and information on which companies have forced labor and how minimal it can seem, but how of a huge impact it has on Uyghurs in East Turkestan, and it has on Uyghurs here. Uyghurs are afraid of losing their history, and Uyghurs are afraid of losing the history for the past 74 years where we've been oppressed. And so when Uyghurs come to the news and come to attention in trends. If it is not a trend, if it is not being utilized or being tokenized, then we're being forgotten, and the forced labor is being forgotten. Even the concentration camps are being forgotten. And so we're seeing that, there's all types of red flags for these forced labor facilities, whether it be some facility or factory that was built near a detention center, or companies that had previously partaked in vocational training in Xinjiang region. All of these have so many impacts and so many different ways of including forced labor in their supply chains that we're not really looking into the small places that they're present in, and that's how I think these companies are being allowed into Canada. And so that's all I really have to say. I spoke a little bit over my time, but forced labor is not through just one section of East Turkestan. It's not just a region or a certain spot. It's all throughout, and it's all Uyghurs that are being impacted by this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Mehliya, for your remarks. And yeah, I will invite Sister Saleha to brief the Justice for All efforts for the Uyghur rights and for the legislations ahead.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to be brief. I'll start out by acknowledging and commemorating the trauma and the pain by impacted Uyghurs that we are so honored to be with today on the panel. Thank you for sharing despite difficulties that we definitely will never be able to imagine. I also want to thank the efforts of many members of Parliament, but particularly MP Garnett Genuis, for pushing these legislative changes in the Canadian government, where it's not always easy to do so. And he described a little bit of that that pushback that him and his party received in terms of implementing some of these laws that are anti-forced labor. I'll speak only today about a recent report that our organization published called Uncovering Slave Labor in Google's Supply Chain. I know that we spent a lot of time during the meeting today talking about forced labor when it comes to cotton and clothing, and that's all very extremely relevant. I think not as much attention is placed on tainted supply chains within major technology companies, and so that's what this report explores. It does look at interesting things. So, for example, things like the role that transparency plays in holding corporations accountable. It also looks at the way that forced labor is uncovered in technology companies, and things and examples that are used are like auditing processes and gaps between external audits and internal self-reported audited reports, amongst other methods that are used to uncover slave labor within technology companies. So I think that some of the recommendations that the report makes are also quite relevant in the expertise that was shared by our panelists today, including Brother Kayum from the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, or URAP. And so these are recommendations that the report makes, as long as I think it's a good summary that in terms of what everybody was talking about today, to help Canada strengthen legislative efforts to foster transparency and to be able to promote ethical business practices to combat forced labor, whether that is in the space of apparel or technology. So we are currently advocating Canadian technology companies to be able to annually publish their supplier list and to share audited reports that would help tremendously in promoting ethical business practices, but also in actually promoting consumer awareness, as technology is just as popular on the consumer market as, for example, it was mentioned, apparel and clothing from Shein and Temu. We already know that Bill S211 was passed, but at this time we're looking to have the Canadian government support its implementation of the act, and in order to make it mandatory for companies to prove that goods were imported from any source, including China, that are not actually being produced with forced labor. We are also encouraging Canadian companies to adopt the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, including the recommended best practices, I would say, of human rights due diligence and mechanisms to address the harm that was elaborated on by everybody today. We also want to further urge and empower the Canadian ombudsperson for responsible enterprise, or CORE, proactively investigate potential instances of forced labor within Canadian supply chains. And we know that it's not actually potential, it's quite prevalent. And we want CORE to have more of a binding mechanism, as was explained a lot more better by our panelists today. And last and certainly not least, we are asking for the Canadian government to improve enforcement measures that, for example, align with the U.S. Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act to block and detain shipments that are suspected of being linked to forced labor. You can get more information about our new report as well as our larger Uyghur advocacy from our website. That's saveuyghur.ca. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and in order to help sustain advocacy for Uyghurs, you could also donate at justiceforallcanada.org/donate. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it over back to Tazeen.
Thank you very much, Sister Saliha. Now I will quickly move to the question answer session. And so we have questions for MP Garnett. So basically, MP Garnett, could you outline the legislative process for our audience from the initial proposal of a policy change to the passage in the Parliament? I mean, it's very important to discuss, and the people want to make it clear that how the legislation, how some proposed suggestion or policy change make it to the Parliament. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I could probably take another hour explaining it, so I'll try to sort of distill down to some core facts that are important for people to understand. So every bill, you'll see a C or an S in front of it. So the bills we've talked about today have generally been S bills, S211, S204. A C bill starts in the House of Commons and an S bill starts in the Senate. So both of the bills we were talking about started in the Senate. However, a bill has to pass both the House of Commons and the Senate in order to become law, and it has to pass in the same form. So it can start in either house, but it has to go to the other one after it's done. So most people pay more attention to the House of Commons. It's where elected MPs sit, senators are appointed, but the Senate does have an important role in the legislative process, especially around initiating legislative items. There are the other thing to note is that if you look at the number of the bill, if it has three numbers, that typically means it's a private member's bill, so proposed by an individual member of Parliament. And then there are bills that are that start at C1, C2, C3, up to however high it goes, that are government bills. Again, the bills we talked about, S204, S211, those are both private members' bills proposed in the Senate. The government does propose government bills in the Senate as well. Process-wise, government bills generally always have a much better chance of becoming law. So when we have major policy changes we want to see happen, usually the first line of attack is to say there should be a government bill on that item. Also, the government has far more resources in terms of legislative drafting, and oftentimes you'll see with government bills much longer legislation dealing with more detailed items. So one of the things that we've said should happen is there should be a government bill on combating Uyghur forced labor. That most of the day in Parliament that we spend actually debating government legislation. There's 1 hour a day set aside for debate on private members' bills. The other 6 or 7 hours outside a question period that the House is sitting, most days is spent on debating government legislation. So private members' bills have a much longer road to go, but they do sometimes pass, and there are different rules in the House and the Senate for how they operate. So in the House of Commons, it's based on a random draw. I could put forward a private member's bill on these issues, but I wouldn't be able to bring it forward for debate because there's a random draw that takes place, and my name is a little too far back. In the Senate, it's a little bit it's not based on a random draw. It's more based on negotiation and consensus. So senators get together, they negotiate, and they decide to move things forward based on the level of support that they have. but once a Senate bill passes the House of Commons, passes the Senate, then it goes to the front of the line for consideration in the House of Commons. So, anyways, I'll try not to say everything here, but the key things to be aware of are the differences between a government bill and a private member's bill. And private members' bills are great, but you want to push the government to put forward government bills because they move faster, they have an easier time, and most of the day is spent on government bills. And then on S versus C bills, and then looking at the three numbers versus if it's typically one or two numbers to know whether it's a government bill or a Senate bill. And there's a lot of private members' bills that get put forward. A very small percentage of them pass, whereas when government bills are put forward, the chances that they will pass are very high.
Thank you very much for explaining all this process. This is really valuable. And now I have a question for Darren Byler. Byler, I've been following your work since 2018, and your recent book sheds light on how China utilizes surveillance technology developed in Seattle and Silicon Valley to exert control over the Uyghurs in the northwestern region of China. You've also drawn a parallel between the use of slave labor in the historic US farm settlements that powered the mills in Manchester and the forced Uyghur labor that contributes to China's rise as an economic superpower. Could you provide some more insight on this topic for our audience?
Sure, thanks so much for the question. So you're referring, I think, to my book, In the Camps, where I outline some of this, especially in the last chapter, where I talk about how one of the companies that was contracted with state security in the Uyghur region really got its start in Seattle. This is just down the road from me here in Vancouver, with graduates of the University of Washington and Microsoft Research Asia, which is a laboratory started by Microsoft in Beijing, and really trained many of the people who became the CEOs of China's computer vision companies. So most of the most sophisticated surveillance companies in China, which are doing like face recognition systems or voice recognition, but they're also working in a whole bunch of other applications. Things like to unlock a smartphone, using your face, or to access an ATM using your face again. The same sorts of technologies that are now widespread in security in many places in the world. This was back in 2015, which was just in the beginning of the People's War on Terror, which is what led up to the camp system. And so I outlined how the knowledge sharing and a lack of sort of foresight or thinking about the ethics of what's being built and how it can be misused, particularly when it's being used by an authoritarian state who wants to advocate and design programs to automate forms of racialization, to directly target people based on their ethnicity, their religious practice, their language. There wasn't safeguards put in place. Back in 2015, the idea was, if we can build it, we should build it. The better the technology, the more sophisticated, the better it is, not thinking about how it can be abused. And so I'm trying to sort of broaden the object of critique to show that the complicity is not only in China, it's also coming from the West, and that it's coming from systems that are used in policing and carceral situations here in North America, that then end up being used in China. The other way I'm talking about this is that our benefit as consumers to buy cheap products, like, we don't want to ask questions about how those things are made. We just want the cheap product. But we have to realize that that there's a cost in having things made cheaply. And before Uyghur forced labor, which has already been here since early 2000s actually, but it's now really expanded, there was already forms of hyper exploitation of Chinese workers in China, and we kind of turned the other way. We said, this is China; they have different rules, and we don't want to know. We have to know. We have to be willing to pay a cost for in our own wallets, if we actually want to do what we say we want to do, which is have a society in the world that's free of forced labor, of slave labor. And so that means, actually doing following through on what we say we want, and being willing to pay more for the things that we need, because it's the right thing to do. So that's some of how I'm thinking in this book. If people are interested, you can take a look at it. That book is quite short. It's 35,000 words. It's not very academic. So hopefully it helps to sort of explain the system, and also humanize the system, show what it looks like, and people can take a look at that.
Thank you very much, Darren. Yeah, it's a very short book, and it can be, it can just 35,000 words, but it's really important. It's narrative driven, and it's very interesting style. So I will recommend everyone to read this book who want to understand the real problem. Thank you very much, Darren. And my next question is from Razia Mahmood. I would like you to just shed some light on your recent trip to Xinjiang. What happened during the visa application process, and your experience at the embassy, and then what you saw there in Xinjiang, what your relatives, friends, family, neighbors are facing there. We would like to hear something from you, Sister Razia. I believe that you visited Xinjiang in 2019. Am I right?
I have to correct that, Sister Tazeen. I visited my family in 2017 at the beginning of May. So 2019, there is no any possibility to even contact with family. So that was 2017. When I returned to East Turkestan to visit my father, who was very ill, I was intimidated by the Chinese embassy in Ottawa before leaving, in the process of applying for visa. So the attitude I encountered from the embassy employee was nothing short of an integration, and I was subjected to this treatment in a dimly lit room with 2 persons, and so I have to sign lots of paper, and I have to deny I have any support for Uyghur cause or Uyghur activism or Uyghur organization such as World Uyghur Congress. They pointed out, and some Uyghur terrorist organization, and we never been a terrorist, and there is no terrorist organization exist. However, they were asking me to sign. I don't have any paper. I don't have any relationship connection with those organizations, and I won't support them. I did that, but I was wondering why this time was different than previous visa application process. But still, I was really in rush to see my dad. He was very ill.
Why do you think? I'm sorry for interruption, but why do you think that they get these signatures from you, and why their attitude was different from the previous visa application? What do you think now?
No, I know. At that time, I'm not aware of what's going on in East Turkestan. However, they know very well what's going on in East Turkestan. They want to avoid people to go to see this reality, this truth, what's happening in East Turkestan, the genocide. So that was their concern. However, I was not aware. At that time, I was in Ottawa. There are not a lot of Uyghurs living in Ottawa, so I don't have really direct a lot of connection to Uyghur community. I don't know what's going on. I didn't know. I just surprised why it is different than previous visa application. But my head was so occupied with my dad's illness. So I was persist to go, and that was I applied in March, at the beginning of March, and I got the visa on May. That was, and they gave me some conditions. Say you are not allowed to bring your cell phone, any computer, any electronic stuff. So I said yes. I signed everything to go, and that was what it is. And when I arrived in, of course, I have some threats in airplane. Someone sitting next to me and say, talking to me about Uyghur, what's Uyghur doing in East Turkestan, how they are bad, and then if something happen, and then the government have order to kill in 3 generations. Kill them in 3 generations. That's someone told me in the airplane. He was sitting next to me. I believe that was threat. At that time, when I arrived at my city, at Gulja city, I realized that was really a threat. And he asked me to bring my contact information in Canada. He wants to keep contact with me. I don't know this person. So I was really scared, and I arrived in Gulja, but what I saw was scared, traumatized sister, brothers, and they said, okay, I was late in plane for 1 hour, but they were feared to death, because when I arrived, they said, I thought you've been arrested. We confirmed you have been arrested. We believe you have been arrested. I don't know why I should arrested. And they said, no, you can't say anything right now, even in the taxi. So we're gonna keep quiet in the taxi until we arrive at home. And then we were quiet in the taxi. We arrived at home, and at home they remove all the connections to internet, cell phone, everything. And they said, okay, now we can talk. So I only stayed 5 days, but this was the worst, hardest time in my life. And what I heard was everyone is gone, all have been arrested. That's what it is. And the city was really empty. City was really empty. I went to a bazaar. It was very crowded bazaar before. I only saw 3 merchandise is open. There were like hundreds of merchandise, all of them were closed. So that was, and I met my previous colleague, and my previous colleague told me about my other very close friend, colleague at the same time. She has been arrested, imprisoned for 5 years because her daughter, 14 or 15 years daughter, was downloaded something, some app, one app that was recognized as a I don't know what kind of app, but that was considered illegal in China. So those kind of story, I don't know how many I can tell right now. This is only I'm telling some. Yeah.
We can understand, Razia. Thank you very much for opening and sharing your story. I mean, your first-hand experience is a powerful human element to the discussion, and your strength is inspiring. And we can understand that it takes incredible strength to revisit such traumatic memories. And your words carry a weight that statistics and reports can't match. Your story reminds us why it's important to address these injustices. Thank you for your honesty and resilience. I will quickly go to Mehliya, Sister Mehliya from Alberta. She's one of the youngest, I believe she's the youngest actually Uyghur activist in North America. Mehliya, can you quickly tell us, I would request you to just brief your response in 1 or 2 minutes. about the Alberta Uyghur Association, how the Alberta Uyghur Association is advocating for for Uyghurs, and how we can collaborate. I mean, the advocacy organizations can collaborate together to push for the right legislation.
I don't think I'm the youngest. There's a lot of Uyghur youth who are, alhamdulillah, being really active. Alberta Uyghur Association actually started with me and my mom. She's been an activist since she was in East Turkestan. She was there for 85 and much more. And so we came here, my mom came here, and she was also continued her advocacy through World Uyghur Congress and then Campaign for Uyghurs. And it came to a point where our Uyghur community is a little bit smaller, unfortunately, but it is growing and there's a lot of interest for Uyghurs. And so we realized that forming an organization and really taking a permanent role in Alberta advocating for Uyghurs was really important. So the beginning of our organization in 2018, we really focused on press conferences, media conferences, photo galleries, inviting speakers, and just putting information out there because there was no information and there was no awareness and there was no talking about Uyghurs, especially where we are from. However, in the past 2 years, we've taken a shift because we're realizing that the mental health aspect is a big contributor to how people are digesting the information of Uyghurs and the plight of Uyghurs. Unfortunately, we're desensitized. We're seeing pictures and images of, human carcasses. We're hearing news about mass killings every other day. So the media has made us so desensitized to this that it feels almost dismissal, saying this is another killing, this is another genocide, which is horrific, but it's the reality, unfortunately. So we've taken a look at the cultural aspects of Uyghurs, introducing people to who Uyghurs are and the identity of Uyghurs. We've done this through a heritage festival for the past 2 years, hopefully our 3rd year this year, but really honing in on who Uyghurs are, these people that are being killed, who are experiencing crimes against humanity, who are experiencing a genocide. But who are these people? It ties in a human aspect and people can sympathize and empathize with us. And then that leads to more conversation and willingness to learn about the situation, because unfortunately, like I said, like we're desensitized, it's hard to kind of get people's attention. And however, we are working with various organizations across the globe, World Uyghur Congress, Campaign for Uyghurs, and obviously the East Turkestan Association of Canada, making sure that we're connected in our plight, in our message, and in our advocacy. When there's an event happening in one city, we do our best to mirror that in another city across Canada, in Edmonton specifically, this way that we're united, and the Canadian government sees a united front, but more specifically the CCP sees that Uyghurs are united throughout Canada and that Uyghurs are not going to because Uyghurs, if we are scattered, that doesn't really work. And so being united, showing unanimous support for things like S211 and all of that, and especially with M62 coming in, hopefully pretty soon here, the Uyghur refugees who are coming in need cross-collaboration work and need our cities who are hopefully going to be accepting Uyghur refugees to be solid and firm. And that's another reason that we've kind of really taken to introducing Uyghur culture into Edmonton and Alberta. That way that hopefully when we get these refugees in, when there's an influx of immigrants, there's a new culture, new atmosphere. And this way we're able to prep kind of the locals, our local communities and our local organizations and local support groups, so that they're familiar with who Uyghurs are, the plight of Uyghurs, so that we're better equipped to help them transition and help them rehabilitate into Canadian society. That's kind of what our Mason's is working on.
Thank you, Sister Mehliya. And I will quickly go. Unfortunately, we do not have time for more question and answers, but it was really insightful, thought-provoking discussion. As we wrap up this insightful and thought-provoking webinar, I'd like to express our sincere gratitude to all esteemed speakers and panelists, our Honorable MP Garnett, whose commitment to the cause is truly commendable, and our experts and academic Darren Byler, who has offered this invaluable insight into the Uyghur struggle. Our appreciation extends to the project manager of Uyghur Rights Project, who played a pivotal role in advancing the Uyghur cause. And of course, our deepest respect goes to the Uyghur activists and victims of the forced labor, Razia Mahmood, who shared her personal experiences and insights. I'd also like to thank Mehliya and Saleha for their valuable contribution and profound insights that have enriched our discussion. This webinar has been illuminating journey, exploring strategies to bring about positive change in Canadian foreign policy with a focus on addressing the Uyghur cause. Together, we have laid the foundation for crucial discussion and action. Let's take the knowledge and inspiration gained from today's discussion and turn them into meaningful steps forward. Together, we can be the driving force behind positive change. Thank you all for your discussion, dedication, and participation. Your voice matters, and your actions can make a difference. Let's continue to stand together for justice, human rights, and Uyghur cause. Together, we can make a change. Sister Saleha, I will invite Sister Saleha at the end to make the conclusion remarks here.
Yeah, I think that, Tazeen, you said it best, and I do recommend everyone to begin actioning in their own way on all of the different recommendations provided by our panelists today. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and do enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll conclude right after this. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and
Thank
sorry
you.
for a little, we had to extend the discussion a little late, about 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. No, this is perfect. Thank you. It was nice seeing you guys. Merci.
See,
Thanks
thank
you all.
you. Nice see you guys.